Try that again. Good afternoon. Make it a little easier on my voice. I apologize. I would have prepared a PowerPoint, and I misunderstood what it was that we were doing this afternoon. So anyway, you'll have to look away or look down or not look at me. But anyway, in the proceedings, I'm not going to go over everything that's in there about the operation, but the point of what's in the proceedings was to illustrate that it's a diversified farm, and especially with forages. And so there's a lot of options as to what we can do with the forages. And one of those options is to make baleage. And so I think later we'll go over in maybe a little more detail some of the mindset behind some of those options. But I started out in farming, first generation farmer in tobacco. It always frustrated me with burley tobacco that there was one option. I couldn't bring it back home and feed it to an animal or do something else with the crop, that I had to go to a specific place, sell it, and for the most part take whatever it was that I got for it. And so with forages, I like to have multiple options as to what I can do with the forage, whether it's feed it to an animal, sell it to someone else, and in what form. Some of the earlier speakers today kind of talked to that point that it's where to plug in the forage. In that speaker's presentation, it was where to plug the forage in across the country. In my case, it's more localized, but what is it that I can do with that to, at the end of the day, make $1? So on our farm, we little bit of an evolution from small squares, still do small square bales of hay, but also doing individually wrapped baleage, just trying it out, figuring out how to make that work. And at this point, we're doing inline wrapped baled silage. We're feeding all of that. We're not attempting to sell any of the silage or baleage. We're not opposed to that. Obviously, we go through the whole exercise to make money. So maybe at some point, especially after winter like this one, maybe that's going to be an option in the future, selling baleage. But I think I'll stop there. There's enough information, I think, in the proceedings, and then we can dive deeper as a panel into how it is that we make the baleage.
Now, let me add just one more thing. When you go from cutting to making sure that you're at the right moisture in your wrapping, just the sequence you go through, and then the others will say that as well.
Did everyone hear that question? So Ray was saying, go over what it is when I'm making baleage, the sequence of cutting to the end product, how we establish what's the right moisture and that sort of thing. So my philosophy is we want to make good quality forage, so we cut with a conditioner everything. And then we use a tedder, so we ted everything, just as a rule of thumb. So even for baleage, we will cut with a conditioner. We will we do everything as though we're making dry hay, but then we'll use baleage as a way to gain days. So we may, the day after I've cut, we may make baleage and get as much of the field up as we can, and then the following day, whatever was left, provided we have dry weather, then go into making dry hay. So there's a point in there where we will just stop making baleage and allow it to dry and to finish to make hay. Is that what you were alluding to? So our experience has been that we will get the baleage drier than we want to 9 times out of 10. That we're convinced that it's too wet. It's funny when you're trying to make something that's wet, you get it too dry, and when you're trying to make something that's dry, it tends to be too wet. But that's been our experience, is that it dries way quicker than we give it credit for. So we go into it trying to make dry hay. We just start making baleage out of the dry hay material before it's dried to that point. Not sure if that's clear, but that's the philosophy.
So with that, Tom?
Thank you all. My name's Tom Wright. Again, I'm from Shelby County, Shelbyville. Anybody's ever been through there? I live on a family farm we've had since back in the 40s. Started out as a dairy farm. In the 1970s, we sold the dairy farm out and went to beef cattle. And we've been there ever since. We started out with some stockers, and then we kind of rolled over into a cow-calf. I've always enjoyed forage, practically better than anything else. Like I said, we do some row cropping also, and it really works good with our forages where we double crop a lot, and we pretty much cover crop everything. We never not put a cover crop on something. It has happened where we couldn't get it on, particularly if we got held up by the weather. And then we'll usually go in with spring oats or something like that in the spring. Back to my forages. One thing about forages is I've always been frustrated about, because I've always pretty much worked away from the farm also, where I had a job somewhere else, and it was always difficult to plan and work around the weather with the way the weather is in Kentucky, and get very frustrated not being able to get my forages up at proper timing. So that's the reason I went to the baleage system, and I've been very happy with it. And pretty much about 90% of the hay that I put up now, we do wrap. We do a lot of cereal grains, rye, oats. We do some, and we'll do some legumes also. I guess you hear a lot of people talk about plies, and we'll talk about that on how much wrap we put on ours. And when I started out 10 years ago, at least I learned a lot, wasted a lot of hay, and had some bad results. But once you do that a few times, you'll kind of learn where your problems are. So anyway, I guess I'll keep it kind of short, and when we get to the panel, I can answer more questions. So.
Thank you, Chris. We have great family members. Nobody can hardly do that by themselves, and a brother is included in that too. And thank you. Forward, yeah, backwards. So we try to balance what we do out there, whether it be cows. We'll wean the calves, and then we background them, feed them silage, a combination of silage, this wrapped hay, and crushed corn, dried distiller's grain. The use of the roll hay, wrap roll hay, for us has been great on the front end of our season and on the back end. Todd alluded to, or Tom did, to get through your season, maybe one field in the front of it would be wrapped hay, the rest of it would be dry. We haven't gone that route yet, but that's fascinating to us that it might work well. But we really concentrate on the front end of like alfalfa and the back end of alfalfa. We have some that would be the alfalfa sample that we took year before last, and 21.9% protein is pretty good. Almost too much. We don't use a grinder, you might say, to grind it up. So we fed these to replacement heifers, like a roll at a time. There are about 40 rolls of it, and along with this alfalfa roll, we fed some good dry hay with it, so they wouldn't have too much at one time. But we are fortunate also. Now this is on the front end. This would be this last spring, just basic grass hay, almost 15% on your protein. So that was we were really tickled with that. The feed value, if I could find it, is 74. I didn't think that was too bad for grass. Dr. Smith would probably tell you different, but or go along with me. Good and bad for the alfalfa or the wrapped hay, we have tried some cereal grains. It was rye, probably too late in the season for it, and it was not very good feed. You could smell that was not good feed. So we ended up not feeding it at all. So there are some downsides to this wrapping hay. Um, how do you identify that? I think in time. Time and experience goes a long way. Another thing we try to look at is the size of the bale that you make. You kind of have to size your equipment up. Our equipment's not top of the line by any means, so ours aren't real heavy. We do have a 5-foot wide John Deere roller, probably 4-foot wide would be more optimum for this. You know what you have, 4 wide, so not so heavy on the front end. But we try to utilize the hay on the front end and on the back end, and somewhere in the middle, you might miss a cutting of clover hay. You're not going to improve the quality. If it's coarse going in, it's coarse going out, and cows generally don't like it. Our experience has been. We also were able to have a good neighbor that we went in and went with to own the roller or the wrapper together. It makes a big difference where the machine is right there with it, with you. But I wish I could tell you some secrets. I would tell you everything, but experience will give you a whole lot of what you need to know.
Go ahead, and we'll ask the other guys this in just a second. But if you could do it over again, you know, a lot of people don't want to take the time of learning by experience. So what would be the things you'd be making sure that you do right off the bat?
What would I improve from my mistakes that I've made? It would be, I think the worst one we did was it was rye, and it headed out, and we just weren't able to squeeze the air out, I guess is what it is, for the fermentation process to take place. That would be the worst thing we have done.
So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take questions from the audience on making high quality baleage or mistakes that these guys may have made over the years that may help you as you get started making high quality baleage. All right, so is there any questions to start off with? Got Jimmy Henning? So you want to start down here? I'm going to fall off the stage here. So just pass that back and forth.
So we started with what we had, and that can work. But kind of going along with what Greg Halich went over earlier, talking about cost of equipment and that sort of thing. There's always improvements to equipment, but currently we use a McHale chopping baler that's 4 foot wide. The max height is 5.5, but that's immaterial for baleage because that's too tall for the wrapper. The chopping probably would have fixed the rye. It would have chopped it tight enough to where you could pack it. And not trying to answer 2 questions at once, but the question about changes you would have made, it's always easy in hindsight, but 2, 3, 4 farmers, I think, would be smarter to work together to have the proper equipment from the beginning than it would be for everyone to, which is easier said than done, but a silage baler that's made for making silage, I think, would be an improvement over other models. I'm a believer in the chopping. I think that makes a huge difference.
When I first started using it, I was using an old Gale baler, string tie only. And you can do okay at 45–40% moisture, but you start getting bumping 50–60%, you're really struggling with that machine. I currently use a regular John Deere, a 567 baler, and I've had pretty good success with it. You can adjust your bale. We roll them about 54 inches in diameter, and we net wrap everything, which has been a big improvement for me also. So that's kind of where I'm at with it.
We also have the 567 John Deere roller. We already had it. And then so we took off from there. In the beginning, when we first started rolling hay, I think they suggested using an untreated twine. Don't know that we ever went that route of the untreated twine. I think we used regular twine when we wrapped ours, but now we use just net wrap. Net wrap has done great for us. That's 5.
Another question? Tommy?
There's a process to use the microwave in discovering what percent moisture it is. It's time consuming, so we just do the old fashioned test, just what it feels like. If it feels good to you, we go ahead and do it.
Well,
Nothing special.
a lot of us experienced, I rode a lot too wet and I rode some too dry over the last 10 years or so. But I do have a windrow, electronic windrow checker. You mash it down in a 5-gallon bucket, and it seems to be fairly accurate. But it's kind of like if you guys raised tobacco years ago when I did, it's when it's in case, it's when you want it. You don't want it too dry because you don't want it to shatter. But you don't want to squeeze water out of it either. And you can tell when or I can, when I'm baling, when it's pretty much at that right moisture. So it's kind of a lot of it's experience, but I like I said, I don't like to have it to where there's just water running out of it.
More of the same experience. The other thing too is when you first start out, you need to be a little bit on the wet side, knowing that when you finish, you're going to be a little on the dry side. So it also depends on the day and what the conditions are, all of those sort of things. So it depends. Depends a lot, a lot like anything in farming, but experience is the biggest tool.
So can I ask a moisture question while we're on that topic? There's like a no man's land between dry hay and when we would recommend that you make silage off of it. But I've seen a lot of producers pushing that no man's land in recent years when I would say the hay was a little bit too dry to be rolling it up and wrapping it. Have you all wrapped any hay that's kind of between that 20 and 35% moisture range?
Yes.
And how's it work?
It's we did this season. We had dry hay that we intended to be dry hay, and the forecast was not correct. I'm sure no one's had that happen. But so as you're in the field with multiple balers and trying to make dry hay, and you're looking at the radar the whole time and upset over that it's wrong again. You switch plans and start to make round bales and wrap it. So in that situation, it's superior to getting good hay rained on multiple times over the course of a week. And so it's worked out fine. It wasn't the initial plan, no.
And I'd have to agree with that also. We had some leafy orchard grass that we were going to try to get up dry, and the weather changed. And we had actually cut it that morning, and that afternoon the weather forecast turned bad for the next day. So we went ahead and just rolled it that afternoon and wrapped it, and it really did really good hay.
It was a little bit drier than you would have wanted for silage.
Yeah, he was probably in the 30% range. Because, but we did cut it that morning, and then we rolled it that afternoon.
We haven't experienced that yet. I'm sure it's out there, but I imagine that would be a mold situation if you get down in the 25 to 30%.
I don't know. I think sometimes, it seems like if you get good oxygen exclusion, you don't get any molding.
That's my experience.
But enough rest. So it hasn't gone through a full fermentation, essentially, what has happened, because the fermentation's been limited by lack of moisture. I saw a question up, Scott.
I've never rolled any that has you could squeeze water out of. No, I have not. I tend to roll it somewhat on the drier side, I would think.
Well, I've rolled some you could squeeze water out of, and it's hard to, it's difficult to roll, but I've rolled some rye like that, but it was cut at a real early stage, and it did turn out to be pretty decent haylage.
Using the tobacco analogy earlier, I would compare it to tobacco when it's in the right stage to take down or to strip. I'm not sure how many people in the room are familiar with tobacco, but the moisture wringing out of it, yeah, that would be on the wet side. But that's another one, like we were talking about, the weather changes, and sometimes you have to move on.
Someone with a question. Yes, sir.
I,
So, I,
go ahead.
yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Not really. And experts possibly would frown on that answer, but my machine is set for 2 inches or whatever, 3 inches, whatever it is, and we just kind of go with that. Early in the season, though, the most concern I have is the ground condition. Actually, we've probably let some forage go on too far because of the concern of compaction.
That's correct. Compaction is always gets to be an issue too. We've got to where we aerate a lot of our fields because and then we don't try not to run hay wagons over them. A lot of times we'll bring the hay to the edge of the fields because they are wet, especially on a lot of the cereal grains that we do. That helps too, but generally we cut it to 2.5, 3 inches all the time.
The same height, but it's because a lot of grass in what we're cutting, so we try to leave a residue for regrowth.
Another question out here? Jesse?
I've never used an individual wrapper, so I'm not able to answer to that. Mine are all in line, and mine's a tube line actually. Um, it's worked flawlessly. It's been a nice, good machine.
I've never operated an individual either. I have an Anderson wrapper that I use currently.
We did start out with the individual. I think that would make sense if you're possibly if you're selling bales. Um, it uses a lot more plastic. It's a lot slower. Tremendous amount of labor with those, or the one that I had. I can only speak to the one that I had. But for personal use, feeding out, I prefer the inline wrapper, hands down. Just dramatically quicker and a lot less plastic. It's not only a lot less plastic to purchase, but it's a lot less plastic to dispose of at the end of the season too.
What do you do with your plastic while we're on that?
Oh, probably a dumpster currently is the, we're not recycling, but have to periodically crush it and put it in the dumpster.
That's what we use also. We keep a 2-yard dumpster there at the farm and put it in dumpsters. We don't recycle.
We have a 6-yard dumpster from the front, and in fact, I was back in the field yesterday, and poor fella had to get out and get all that trash off his windshield where the net wrap was hanging down to his bumper all the way across. I don't think he appreciated that much, but that's life.
Well, I'm proud of you that you aren't sticking it in the gully somewhere or burning it. So, yeah. All right, we have another question.
The individual wrapper was a standalone, so you had to bring the bales to it. The one I had, you brought the bales to it, wrapped there, and dumped them there. The next time we would handle those bales is when we fed. So it was a cheap entry. It wasn't that cheap, but it was an entry into wrappings while we did that. And that was before all of the community inline wrappers were available and all that sort of thing. Had those been available, we would have probably gone that route at that time.
Yes, sir.
That's not been my experience. No, I wouldn't think that's. I'm not sure exactly what's going wrong there, but that wouldn't seem normal.
Are you pushing uphill? You may try wrapping more at where the joints are. Sometimes I have to do that, and we try to hold the consistency of the bales just as good as we can. Try to get them. I have had some of that at different times.
When I first started out, I had that issue, and I thought that was just part of the animal. And recently, I don't have that, so it might be your machine. It might be how it wraps and the tension on the when it rolls on the plastic may not be getting tight enough.
I ran a wrapper and both times it was the same wrapper I ran.
What kind of wrapper is it? That was an Anderson. Did you lock the pressure on so that it's putting pressure against the bales?
I don't know, the guy set it up and I pushed the button and he left.
Okay. On the Anderson baler, when you start wrapping, there's a lever you switch over, and that's like brakes the rear wheels, so that you're always pushing them together. There is, yeah. That's what keeps them compressed together.
When I didn't have it, the guy stayed there and he ran it and I loaded it. And then the other times he left and I ran it and I didn't know about a break. Good information. I have a question. A couple quick questions. How long do you prefer to
we use it for the stockers and the brood cows. The brood cows, I generally unroll it when the weather permits. But the feeders, stockers, they'll get theirs in a ring, in a ring. We had several rows left from last year, and they kept really well. And I think the amount of wrap that you put on there is your key to that. That and that keep the varmints out, whether it be a small animal or a 1,500-pound cow. You got to keep them out of there, and it'll keep.
How many layers of plastic are you putting on your bales?
About 3 inches on the lap. I can see 3 inches left. I can see.
You know how many layers it would be?
I do not. I think plastic's 3 feet, 30 inches.
Somewhere in that 8 to 10 layer.
We use 7 to 9 layers is generally 7 to 9. 7 to 9 layers is what we generally do. And on your question, we feed it to our brood cows. We feed it to, which we have a kind of a split herd. We feed some cows that are calved in the fall, and we have some calves that spring, and we feed them to both those. And then our replacement heifers that we're feeding, we feed it to those also. Now we'll do the hay samples in our fall cows that are nursing. We'll get the better hay.
Same as these guys. Feed it to all classes of beef cattle, and depends on what it is that we wrapped up as to what it is that we're feeding to who. Better quality stuff to animals that we're trying to finish. We forage finish or grass finish cattle. So brood cows won't get quite the same quality as the finishers. The wraps, that's one of the luxuries of having your own wrappers. You can kind of set it up the way you do things and not have to adjust it every time it comes to your place from the last place. And but roughly 8 wraps would be about what we're putting on. We also, the baler's net wrap, I think that does make some difference. It's a little smoother surface that it's wrapping. Also depends on what it is that we're wrapping up. That if it's more coarse, that may require more wraps to keep it protected. And we try to feed everything the same year, same season, and not carry over too much if we can keep from it. But it will last, like Tom was saying, into the next season. I would think by the second season you need to have that fed. Supplementation is, I think it is reduced, provided that you're getting the forage off at the right time in the field. And compaction was talked about earlier. We have a field that this last year that we actually stunted the regrowth in the field because of trying to take off the baleage at the proper time and just such a wet season. So it's the same issues. It's just another tool in the toolbox to help you try to get the forage off the field at the right time.
So the comment was, even with the dry hay, if you're trying to make dry hay and you're driving over that field 4 or 5 times, mowing it and tedding it and baling it and raking it, that you're going to have compaction issues also.
So multiple questions there. Preservative, we're not using any preservative. We have made wheatlage and rilage and whatever terms you want to use We're primarily perennial-based pasture and hay ground, so we're not planning, although that may change with the way the seasons have gone as of late, but we're not using many annuals or any of that sort of thing. Some, but not, but it's because of cover crops for other crops, tobacco and things of that nature. Moisture, that's going to be the million-dollar question for this afternoon. And speaking for myself, no, I can't tell you. We're attempting to be at, especially after what we'll learn after our panel, what Dr. Henning's going to go over. We're trying to be closer to the 60%, but we probably tend to be drier than that, just by the nature of weather and production agriculture and trying to accomplish something. It's hard to fit everything into the proper window. So some's a little wetter, some's a little drier, but the sum of the average is probably closer to 50% than 60.
We don't use any preservatives. I don't particularly use a hay bind either. We just use a disc mower. And sometimes we've had to let it, I've never tedded any, but sometimes we will sometimes cut in the second week of April. We'll be cutting some cereal grains. So sometimes it may have to lay out there 2 or 3 days just to get it down in the 60% range because it's overcast and the ground's wet, and to get it to where we can wrap it or roll it and wrap it. And then also another thing is a lot of times we'll cut some kind of average grasses that are pastures, but we'll cut them early enough that they'll make good hay, where if you were in a normal situation you could never get them up dry enough to make even decent hay. So that's a big plus for quality. And all of our cattle really flesh score good right now on what we're feeding them, and we're not feeding them any supplements other than hay. That's all they're getting in minerals.
The 2 samples that I had, they're 6 or 8 months apart. Both of them were between 45, 46% dry matter. So apparently it's somewhere in the 40, below 50 probably for me. And that has worked well for me. You can just plumb get it too heavy for your machines if you're not careful, my experience.
Yes, sir. The last bale.
It's been an issue for us from the start. We have tried to wrap the last bale. You got a fork hole in it, tape it, and it still spoils. Well, we do almost the same thing and then put an end bale maybe of a dry roll, which we lose some of the dry roll, but we tend to do somewhat better preserving the last silage roll. So they do make a cover, I think, to go on the end, but that's maybe cost prohibitive. I don't know, but I would hate to have 5 rows of 20 rolls of hay and you lose one on each end. Ours tend to be pretty long, and we sacrifice the end.
And we kind of do the same thing. But we'll generally stub a dry roll just to the end of the wrap and try to make our rolls or line as long as we can.
Same thing, dry hay. The issue is that especially the last 2 winters is by the time you make baleage the following year, you tend to not have any dry hay that you've saved away. And then the second issue is that because of the wrapper only accepting a 50-some inch bale, we tend to not have a grass hay bale that's the proper size to fit through the wrapper. But we try to do the same thing, make the lines as long as possible and not have any breaks in the line.
Yeah, we both have a 567. What was the question again, sir? I haven't really noticed anything any worse than baling dry hay. That's correct. Which, and the baler I have is, I bought it used also, when we run about 500 to 600 through it a year. But you'll have your regular normal wear, but I haven't seen anything excessive.
I don't either. I don't see any excessive wear on mine either.
So we tend to wrap all different times of day, and sometimes our best plans cause us to still be wrapping after dark, and so the wrapper has lights on it, which may not be a helpful thing because it seems to draw insects, and then they by accident get trapped in the wrap, and it seems like that we have more issues with birds trying to peck through the plastic to get to the insects from the evening, where the lights were burning, drawing the insects. Um, but we've had other, last year we wrapped some during the middle of the day, no lights, insects weren't a problem, and same experience where we've also had fox and coyote run along the tops, cut holes in it, and seem to just play with it, just for the entertainment of it. So we use a lot of electric fencing for the type of farming that we're doing, so we tend to surround the bales with electric fencing, and so maybe that's a consideration for fox and coyote and that sort of thing. Obviously, birds would be a separate issue. Your question too about the longevity of the baler. We have a baler that's designed to make baleage, but we also make dry hay. The dry hay seems to give it more fits. It's a great machine, works well in dry and wet hay, but the dust from the dry hay, I think, is more wear and tear on the baler than the weight of the wet hay. Just my experience with a baler that's designed for wet hay.
Could you two talk about managing varmints in your operations?
For some reason, I feel like you're leading me somewhere. Where?
I mean, that's a real concern is you go to all this work to wrap these bales up, and then something comes along and puts a hole in them. And how do you manage that, raccoons and coyotes and so forth?
Like I was saying earlier, with electric fencing and that sort of thing, my experience so far is I haven't had much issue with raccoon and possum and that sort of thing getting into the baleage. Occasionally birds. Then this last year, fox or coyote. Um, but luckily, in the grand scheme of things, it's not been a monumental problem.
And it's been the same with me. I found that when I wrapped earlier and I didn't use as many plies, I had more problems with varmints than I do when I put any more plies on. I don't know whether they can't smell it or what, or it's just tougher for the birds to peck a hole through. But we'll have some of the same problems. And generally it seems to be later in the season we have a little bit of worse, but it's cold weather also. We don't have as much spoilage with the haylage either.
The grass or alfalfa, generally I don't have any troubles with the varmints. We have rolled up some later matured wheat that had generated some seed heads, and where the mice got in it and the coyotes decided that would be an easy dig through to get them. I don't know what it was, but that we had several holes. Now, again, I'm like Todd. We put electric fence around ours, and sometimes upper management doesn't check the electric fence at times, and the cows can get in there, and they do make a mess. We had about 90 rows that we had to wrap again. which was bad. But most of our silage hay pens now, we will go around the outside with a row of dry hay, just in case the electric goes down or anything to keep them out, of that wrapped hay. They get into the dry hay, that's not so bad.
Yes, sir. So maybe can you comment about the kind of topography you want to put your hay on, or how you want to orient it on the topography?
Mr. Lyon made a comment that he had made a dam one time, and we had that issue one time too. Sure did. So down in a swag where the water could build up against it, it will do that. Topography, that more level the better, I would think. But I don't generally focus on that too much.
I personally like a little uphill. That way I'm pushing, I feel like I get a little more compaction between my bales. So when the machine's pushing the bales together, I'm going in an uphill direction. That's the way that we always try to do it.
We're more focused on where it is that we're going to feed. We're transporting most of the bales to the wrapper. We typically don't wrap in the field. And so because of that, I'm more thinking about this time of year, where is it that I'm going to feed and how close is the feed to the animals. We have an area, a fairly sizable area that's rock or gravel. And so we've wrapped there. We store a lot of bales outside on that rock. We've had some issues with that, with the inline wrapper. It'll pick up the rock and get into the rollers and tighten those up to where we're starting to tear the plastic as the tube comes out the back end. So that's a consideration, that it's a great place in the wintertime to be able to get the bales out and to take them somewhere, because you're on rock. But it's not that soft underneath the tube when you're making them.
Get a question here.
Now I think we've established that it sounds like the three of us are making it a little bit on the dry side. When you're making it. No, that's what I was talking about. No, I'm not. Straight baleage. Yeah, for the most part, if we're into a certain type of feed, that's what we're into, and we're not. I don't think it's overly high in moisture to where it's giving us fits.
Once I get into haylage, I stay with haylage, and I generally hold whatever dry hay I have and feed it last, because of if I need to hold over some hay over a year or so, I'll use the dry hay to hold over.
Most of the time, my wrapped hay is of better quality. So say if I'm feeding a group of 50 cows 3 rolls of hay, I generally will feed one wrapped roll, one dry, and then possibly if I have some older year-old hay or 2-year-old hay, I will also, every now and then, I'll give them one of those too, so they don't have a steady diet of the high-octane hay, and then something that's 2 or 3 years old. Which 2 years old, I'll say 2 years old.
Do they choose one over the other when you do that?
They'll go to the wrapped hay first. They sure do. The stretch film that is kept over a year or so, I haven't had any trouble with this as long as it wouldn't damage. If it gets a ding or something in it, it will tear as it's being used. Sun film, as far as I know, is the variety of choice for me because that's what my vendor has.
We use the sun film also and have been happy with it. And now I've held some generally a year old, whatever I have over.
Sun film also, and the same as Tom was saying, if a roll is damaged, uh, it's basically a nightmare to try to do anything with that. So, trying to protect the rolls of stretch wrap, put them somewhere that they're protected, and I would assume out of the sun would be beneficial.
So, do you all have special tape to catch rolls in your plastic?
Yeah.
Could you just mention that because some people will use duct tape?
Oh, yes. So we do patch the holes with the proper tape, not just duct tape or I'm not sure what people would use, Gorilla Tape or but the but tape that's designed for that purpose.
Yes, sir.
Out of your yearly harvest, what percentage of wrap do you use to whatever
Generally, I don't lose but the end rolls. Now, I have made some mistakes and rolled some down in a downhill direction. They had some gaps in it. We lost some from that, but that was not really, it was just more the operator's problem than the hay. But we generally don't lose anything but the end rolls. And one thing we didn't talk about either, and I don't know what you got, but you know, on that stretch of that film, we try to stretch it about 50%. That's what they recommend when you're wrapping.
I guess a follow-up to that is how vigilant are you? How often do you walk your storage rows and look for damage and patch and that sort of thing?
I try to check them at least once a week, once every 2 weeks, something like that.
Every year I get asked about buying tube silage from a neighbor. So they say, can I move it and rewrap it? So maybe it's the next spring. I usually say I don't think you should, but I've never known of anybody that tried it. Have you all ever tried that or heard of anybody that's moved it and rewrapped it?
Well, along with that mismanagement, let the cows in. I rewrapped it one time and didn't have any trouble at all. That was actually, it was one afternoon that we saw them. They hadn't been there very long, but you couldn't make enough tape to patch the holes that they.
What time of year was it?
Now that was summertime. That was summer, sure was. And then the next day we were able to get rent a wrapper. That was back in the early times, but good hay. It still made good hay.
Any other questions? Jesse?
So, Ray, were you thinking somebody has reported to you that they'd had problems with that rewrapping?
Usually when somebody asks me that, I'll kind of check around with other college experts, and they're just too scared that it may not work. It's good to hear that you all have been able to do it. Obviously, you don't recommend doing that. It's better than it go to waste, I guess. And that's obviously you didn't go to waste.
I think the general recommendation is you don't carry it over. Because it's really, when we look at bale silage, it's not the ideal bale silage package because there's essentially a lot of surface area to a small volume ratio. And good as a large silo where you have a large volume in a smaller surface area.
And I guess to follow up with what you said, you are gonna carry it over. You know that if you get holes in it, it's gonna spoil. So better to redo it than to let the whole thing spoil. So none of us will guarantee that it's gonna work.
And you may want, why did I have any left over? It tends when, in my experience, when green up comes along, takes them a while longer to clean up a roll of hay. Therefore, we stop feeding the wrapped hay and just feed the dry hay. The wrapped hay, if they take 2 or 3 days to clean it up, it's probably not good for the cow. Cut one day.
No, bale.
We were late one evening, yes, and quality is not as good. It just smells a little differently, but we got caught in rain and weren't able to finish up until the next day. But there was a difference. You could just smell it.
And it's the same for us. We've had that happen. It's a little different.
Another question?
Out in the middle of the field.
I was told over and over that, as soon as you got that bale out, you had to feed it. But I've sold every roll I've ever wrapped, and nobody's ever had they'll come get a trailer load at a time, and they'll feed them over a couple of weeks, and then they'll come get another trailer load.
So are they in a line?
Is that in the winter or is
I won't open it till winter time.
So yeah, that probably helps with the.
Oh, yeah, I won't open it, but, I've never had nobody complain about it.
So the comment was, is he's selling individual bales from an inline wrapper, but he does it during the winter months when the chances of spoilage is probably lower. Usually people that are selling baleage, individual bales will wrap individual bales. Are there any other questions?
I've got one. How often do you all check every load, test every load, check the fermentation profile? How long know with a lot of that? Do a hay analysis on it?
No one's wanting to take your question, Adam.
The answer's no.
Thanks for coming. Well, my first distraction was every load, exactly what a load was. We're not looking at the fermentation other than when we take it out to feed. And there was a question about spoilage earlier. It's hit or miss. That for the most part the in bales, but occasionally there would be an issue with, like we've talked about with fox, coyote, or something tearing the plastic, and so you'll have the odd section where there might be 7, 8, 10 bales that are spoiled. But it's also an experience thing. You can look at it and tell smell as well. You can tell whether or not things are correct or incorrect. Not overly complicated.
smell something off, what did you associate it with that bale? Was it in ultra plastic fine? What else?
to this point, anytime there was an off smell, it's always been that there was cut plastic or, and there's odd things that'll happen that something goes wrong with a bale in the field. We rebale it, and now it's misshapen because of um, the windrow's not even and that sort of thing. So you get a clump or a ball on one side of the, and so then when it goes through the wrapper, it rubs on the tire. When it comes out the back end, it puts a rip, um, and life's happening at a faster speed than we're operating at a lot of times. So you check it from a truck as you drive past, checking cattle and moving on to the next project. But then when you go to feed, you realize that, oh, that bale, there was a split there, and uh, that bale needs to be set aside. So we do test. We segregate according to where the hay came from. So we're testing according. We'll wrap alfalfa grass. We have some of that. We have a lot of grass clover. Late fall this year, late fall, we wrapped a lot of that sort of thing. If it puts weight on a cow in the field with them grazing it, it'll put weight on a cow wrapped up as baleage. So we're not exclusively wrapping alfalfa or red clover. It just depends on what's in front of us and if we think it's viable. And then sometimes, as we've outlined, also it depends on whether or not the weather changes and your plan needs to change.
I think I know as I feed some hay and I go back and think about where that hay came from, sometimes I can pick up some higher moisture hay in the field when I'm rolling, and generally if it's real high, you'll get some kind of a vinegary smell out of that, and the cows they eat it, but they don't seem to eat it as well as they will some of the others.
Crop maturity, to me, as I said earlier, the rye was cut and we tried to wrap it way too mature. I missed a cutting on clover one time and wrapped it. Well, I thought it was great. Really smelled the best. And the cows just did not like it at all. I was really surprised, but it was coarse. Maybe they pulled out what the leaves that they wanted and the blooms and left the rest of it. But overall, it smelled really good, but it just the cows didn't like it at all. And the rye, of course, the rye was bad from the start. We didn't feed much of it, if any.
So I think you hit on probably one of the most important things to realize about baleage is if you put garbage into that bale, you're going to get garbage out of that bale. There's just no way around that. Most of the real disasters with stage of maturity is with cereal rye because it just gets ahead of you. And next thing you know, you're essentially rolling up straw. And you're wondering why you're not getting a good fermentation. Well, there's no sugars left in the plant to get a good fermentation. So stage maturity is absolutely critical. So lignin is often related to stage of maturity at harvest, and stems will tend to have higher lignin than the leaves in it. So raising it a little bit may help, but really focusing on getting it cut at the right stage of maturity is going to be a critical factor for improving digestibility of that forage. Any other questions?
Just one comment is, so we were talking about storage of forage and talking about buildings and that sort of thing. I think this this method could also be considered in that conversation. And I like numbers, and so I'm going to not get into the numbers. I was about to rattle that off. But anyway, you should look at the mathematics of it. But if you're short on barn storage, especially in a year like the last two where we're short on feed, short on hay this time of year, and trying to figure out how to do better this coming year, this is a way to save more of the forage and to have it when it's time to feed. And it's a cheaper way than initially, at least, than a barn.
Can I ask one more question of you guys? Have you wrapped any dry hay with, say, just 2 or 3 layers of wrap to shed water off of it instead of putting it in the barn or letting it set outside? Okay. We do. How does that work for you?
After we unwrap it, we go up and we slice it between them bales so it can get air and no sweat.
Yeah. Does it keep pretty well? Okay.
How many wraps? 2 or 3.
So did everybody hear that? He said that if you're going to try to put a couple layers on dry hay, it's better off to let it go through the sweat first before you try that, so you don't get that foliage around the outside edge. Okay. Good. Jesse? So have you guys, anybody have experience with different colored plastics? White, no black? Okay. So availability is probably an issue. Where do you, is your black have a good UV stabilizer in it? Is there any other, all right, Ray says we've got to wrap things up here. Well, we're pretty close to on time, aren't we, Ray? For me moderating, we're pretty close to on time. Let's thank our panelists for this outstanding panel.